Hi, everybody. Welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. I'm Jim. I'm celebrating the 1,000 subscriber plateau, that milestone. And in my last video talking about this, I invited people to ask me questions. And I got a nice flood of really good questions coming in from several viewers. And I thank all of you who did contribute questions. If more continue to stream in, I might do a second video. We'll see how that goes. And I'm going to try to move through these relatively quickly, but I'll do my best to answer these many good questions I got. One question I got was, have you always been a reader since childhood, or was it something you discovered later on? And how did you discover reading? Well, I think, yeah, I was a reader since childhood. I remember my picture books. You go all the way to books like for babies, you know, things like Pap the Bunny and Goodnight Moon and books like that. And I remember, you know, the Dr. Seuss books really vividly, and picture books from the Bible that my mom would read to me. And, you know, those were in my bedroom, and, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. And then there was the Scholastic Book Club that we had in grade school, and I loved getting those books too. So we always had a nice supply of children's books, and that's really where it all started for me, probably for a lot of you folks too. So the fact that, like, discovering books, the books were sort of always there. Really. What genres do you favor in your reading? A viewer asks. In which are you well read, and in which do you regret having gaps in your knowledge? This is a great question, and it's one that I think about sometimes. I guess the first genre that comes to mind would be what we call classics, right? The great books. And this could be classics of literature, primarily fiction, poetry, drama. I consider myself pretty well read in those classics, English language literature, but also world literature in translation, but also philosophy, history, social science, other genres that I like to read. I do have a more than token interest in science fiction, although I do not consider myself extremely well read in science fiction. There are genres, fantasy even less so, although there's some fantasy novels I really love. There are books like, you know, historical fiction, yeah, a little bit, but these are not genres I always seek out. Romance genre, I have basically no knowledge of at all. My mom loved the Grace Livingston Hill novels, which one day I was shopping at a used bookstore and I was looking for some books for her. And I asked the proprietor, like, where I could find the Grace Livingston Hill books. And she said, oh, those are called that's in the virginal Gothic genre. So virginal Gothic romance. She loved those books. And but I haven't read a one of them, and I haven't read any other romance really. Crime fiction and mystery fiction, not a real huge fan of those. Like, I don't want to slag them. I just don't read in those genres very often. The ones that I have read were okay, but they didn't keep me coming back. So maybe that's an area that I would explore more. I'm always open to trying out new genres. There are some, like, in that category that I do like. You know, I did like some of the Sherlock Holmes stories, books like Hound of the Baskervilles, A Study in Scarlet. Westerns, not so much. You know, I've read a few maybe, but like I'm pretty underread in those genres. And contemporary lit, and this brings up something I want to make a video about one of these days, like a more extended video, but I'll just touch on it here. I consider myself pretty well read in classics, but contemporary literature, not so much. I mean, I confess that I am not well read. I am not up to speed. books that were published 25 years ago, like those are new books for me. Like, so I am way behind the times. I try to keep up with things just by watching and reading reviews of contemporary literature. So I have some sense of what people are talking about, what's in, what's out. But boy, am I underread. You can't do it all. That's one thing I would say to you all. You just can't do it all. So contemporary lit is something I wish I could read a little bit more of, but I don't seem to have the time to. Another genre I don't read much of at all is horror. I did read a Stephen King novel last year, but I've only read maybe like 2 Stephen King novels, and basically not much else in that genre. So yeah, I have lots of gaps in my reading knowledge, and that could change. That could change as our whims change, our tastes change. We get older, we just change as people. So I like to be open to like looking at some new stuff. Here's another question. Since you are a writer, could you create a video on your favorite writers or books that have helped you in your own writing endeavors? That would be a fun one to make. I can give you some names of some favorite writers that have helped me, that I think have rubbed off on me in like subtle ways, mostly subtle ways. But, names that come to mind, and these are not in any particular order, but J.D. Salinger was influential. Mark Twain was influential. Hermann Hesse, very influential. John Gardner, his fiction, the John Gardner of Grendel fame. There's another John Gardner out there. I think he does mystery or suspense novels. Not him, the John Gardner who died in a motorcycle accident. Marcel Proust, definitely an influence. Flaubert, for sure. Balzac, Faulkner, Charles Dickens, Henry David Thoreau comes to mind. And I'm sure I'm leaving like a ton of other people out, but those are just names that popped into my head as probably exerting some kind of an influence, like showing me like the possibilities of what writing can do, or something about the style that I liked, or something that I thought I could maybe imitate or emulate, or something that spoke to me. It was a little bit closer to home than some other writers. And then others were more like, wow, I love this cool, amazing stuff that they're doing. I'd like to try my hand at that. This is a great question too. How have your readings for your Great Books, Big Ideas channel affected your views of life, happiness, and how to live responsibly? In other words, how have they informed your spiritual growth? I think that has affected my views of life, happiness, and how to live responsibly. Basically, I'm kind of on board with what John Gardner talks about in his controversial book on moral fiction. It's a misunderstood book, but this idea that great literature takes up moral themes or engages with moral problems or has some kind of a moral center to it. Not that you can't, it's not do-gooder virtue signaling fiction. This is fiction that talks about like moral problems and it just engages with it. I love that kind of literature, and I love philosophy that talks about ethics and how to live your life and so forth. And I'd like to read often literature through a philosophical lens, although maybe I'm not saying that's like my favorite way to read literature, but it's certainly a valid way to read it. So I do get a lot of sustenance from what I read. I see how other people approach life. I can extrapolate. I can inject myself into other characters and see the world through their eyes, and then think about how I see the world and compare. I often think of that essay by Kenneth Burke, the 20th century literary critic, social theory guy, where he talked about literature as equipment for living. That was a concept I like to teach to my students too. Like, this is stuff that you kind of can plug in and you actually use this in a weird way. Like, you can learn from it, not in a didactic way. I'm not the hugest fan of didactic literature, but with some exceptions. But you can definitely learn from literature. So it makes you a little wiser. It makes you, it just teaches you. Things resonate more. It enriches your life. Do you have any thoughts on the box sets sold by the Great Books Foundation? They were based on the Great Books of the Western World and marketed for Great Books discussion groups. I do, and I'm going to show you one of these box sets right now. Here is what the questioner was asking about. These box sets that were issued by the Great Books Foundation out of Chicago, and this happens to be the first year course, and it's called Readings for Discussion, and it's a different list from what you find in the Great Books of the Western World sets. It starts with the Great Books Primer, and this is guides you on how to read the books and so forth. And these, I think this foundation was started by Mortimer Adler and Robert Maynard Hutchins. You can read some about it, some of the history in the Alex Beam book, A Great Idea at the Time. And these are, I haven't read any of these particular volumes. I just collected this one box set. But just to show you what they look like, they're very plain. They're paperbacks. I assume they were pretty affordable, and that was the goal of them. And they just contain the text of the work, like here's the Apology by Plato. And it doesn't look like they have discussion questions built in. Maybe in the primer they do. This was, I think, an attempt to provide readers with an affordable solution. So if you couldn't afford one of the Great Books of the Western World hardcover sets, which were a little pricey, then you could do this. And this would be good for like discussion groups. And there was a fad in the late 40s and 50s where these book clubs were pretty popular, especially in the Midwest of America. And I like the design of these box sets. It's a very 50s look to it, isn't it? And this would be a great idea for another series on the channel, would be to follow like the year-by-year courses through this. And anyway, what are my thoughts about that? They're fine. They don't have much in the way of like critical apparatus, like not much in the way of footnotes or introductions or anything like that. Oh, okay. Now there is, like in this Great Books Primer, there is a lot of stuff in here actually. Yeah, I think they're fine. They're pretty cool though if you're into collecting vintage books. And you will sometimes see the boxes like this. This isn't the only time I saw something like this. And they come in different colors for different years. Another viewer asked, "What's my favorite Shakespeare play?" There are so many favorites. I mean, Hamlet comes to mind. King Lear comes to mind. As far as comedies, Midsummer Night's Dream would probably be my favorite Shakespeare comedy. It might be my favorite Shakespeare play overall. But a lot of these favorites questions are almost impossible for me to answer, but those are a few of my favorites. My favorite Dickens, that is another really tough one. I have read almost all of Charles Dickens's work. The only stuff I haven't read, I haven't read Sketches by Boz, I have not read Barnaby Rudge, and I have not read Our Mutual Friend. I went through a Dickens phase about 20 years ago or so, and just read one after the other. But if I had to say my favorite Dickens, and there are many favorites, but I think Great Expectations probably would be up there. But I really need to reread Dickens to make a more educated opinion on what would be my favorite, because opinions change. I'll give you an example of this. I read David Copperfield, or most of it, in 10th grade honors English class, and I struggled with it. Long books back then were really hard for me to get through. And then, I didn't really think much of it. It was just difficult. And then when I reread it, well, like I said, about 20 years ago or so, I loved it. I loved it. It's one of his best books. So, opinions can change as we change. Like, that's why it's important to come back to things. So another question that came up was, who's my all-time favorite author? It's impossible for me to say. I have so many favorites. My least favorite authors, or most overrated, most underrated authors, this would be a good idea for a video. And I don't like to take down authors a whole lot, because sometimes if an author doesn't hit for me, sometimes I feel like it might be my fault. It might just be like, well, I'm not the reader for this author, and it's not the author's fault. It's just this either just wasn't intended for me, or for some reason I can't access it. It doesn't mean that objectively that author is horrible or bad. I don't really think about best and worst authors a whole lot. Most underrated authors, Lawrence Durrell comes to mind. I would consider a favorite author. I really just enjoy reading his prose, but nobody really talks about him anymore. But I think he's a really cool author. I wish more people read him so we could have conversations about him. But yeah, he comes to mind. John Gardner, I think, is underrated. He got in trouble when he wrote On Moral Fiction, and then he basically insulted everybody in the contemporary literature scene. And then, he was I wouldn't say he was blacklisted, but he caught a lot of flack for it. And I don't think people were in any hurry to canonize him. But he is, I think, underrated, and he deserves a lot more attention. You all are giving me really good ideas for upcoming videos, so that's fun to think about. Guilty pleasure genres. I don't know. I wish I had more guilty pleasures. I think. Well, I'll give you one. Would be philosophy. I can't defend reading philosophy. I don't even always enjoy reading philosophy, and yet I still do it. I don't know. There's something wrong with me. But that. Sometimes I do get some guilty pleasure from that. I know I shouldn't be enjoying this book by Kierkegaard, but I'm liking what I'm reading. It's fun. All right, so the dog wanted some attention. He was standing at the door and looking at me and saying, who are you talking to? Well, I'm talking to the iPhone camera. But you can say hello to the audience, my friend. This one kind of comes out of left field, but I like the question. By the way, have you read anything by Friedrich Schiller? He wrote the Ode to Joy, featured in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and his plays seem to have been inspirational to opera composers of the 19th century. I haven't read much else by Schiller except for Ode to Joy. I do have his drama I think it's called Wallenstein. That's in the Great Ideas Today. I haven't read it though. There was one thing I read by Schiller, though, if memory serves me well. As an undergraduate, I took I guess it was called a literary theory or literary criticism class. And Schiller was in that anthology, and I'm sure we read something by him. I no longer have the anthology because literary theory was a genre that I probably spent too many years of my life reading, and it's a regret, and it's not a guilty pleasure. It's just kind of like guilt for reading a lot of that. Some of it's great, but Schiller, Schiller's better known as a poet and so forth. But there was some kind of literary theory in that anthology that was what caught my eye. I just wish I remembered what it was. And I'm not much of an opera fan, so I can't really speak to that. So sorry, I can't answer that question a little bit better. Here's someone asks, I'd love to hear a bit more about your teaching career. Was it high school, university? What did you teach? What did you enjoy teaching the most? What made you want to teach? What made me want to teach was just necessity. So I went through college as an English major, and I took a second major in Latin, but I really considered myself an English major. And I was mostly interested in creative writing. So when I went to grad school at University of Texas, I took an MA in English with a concentration in creative writing. And of course, I was a little worried about what am I going to do with this degree? And one of the pathways would be to teach. So I think the master plan was to get my master's. I was never interested in getting a PhD because I'm not a scholar. And I thought, well, if I get this degree, it may qualify me to teach creative writing. Maybe I could get a good job. And also, I knew with a master's I could get adjunct teaching work. So that's how I fell into that. But it wasn't really like this dying need to teach. But having said that, I come from a family of teachers. It runs in the family. My father was a high school math teacher. My mother was a grade school teacher for a little while before she became a mother and homemaker. And my sister taught for more than 30 years, grade school, middle school in Lancaster County, and extended family were teachers. So a lot of teachers in the family. So I taught at the university level. I didn't want a chance teaching high school. I thought that was too risky. And I was basically an adjunct for many years. But also did some other kinds of work, including freelance writing, technical writing, and stuff. So it wasn't all about teaching. And then I was lucky enough to get hired as or get transferred from an adjunct position to a non-tenure track full-time position, which I did for about 22 years or so, until just last year when they bought me out. So that's that. What did I teach? It was almost always first year freshman composition and introduction to literature, and then occasionally introduction to creative writing classes. And then every now and then they'd throw me a bone. Like I was kind of like the relief pitcher. If someone was on sabbatical, they would give me something like else. So I taught, like an advanced fiction class. I taught, I did some survey courses, like World Literature Survey and American Literature Survey. And they were kind of fun. A lot of work, though. But what did I enjoy teaching most? If I had to pick, it would be the Intro to Literature classes. Like I really like to try to turn students on to the joys of reading. And, these were almost entirely non-majors. So I learned how to sell literature to them, or at least I tried, and to challenge them as well. But I would say that would be the number one. And then oddly, because everyone complains about having to teach freshman composition, I actually came to love teaching freshman composition. Or maybe love's too strong of a word, maybe like a strong like for it. Like my last few years, like the last 5 years of teaching, I didn't mind teaching freshman comp at all. Like I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the challenge, and I thought it's a great sort of first semester course, and it was always fun to see the freshmen and I kind of vicariously enjoyed that because you can see how excited they are at first to be in college. So that was a fun one too. Question: what are your top 3 most favorite books of all time that you personally love? Well, I think I already did a non-answer to that one. It's impossible for me to say. I really thought hard about it, and I thought I don't have any favorites. The more correct answer is I have too many favorites. But I don't think I could actually answer that until I do more rereading. And this brings up something that I might want to talk about in more detail. I have this idea that like I'm at this stage in my life where I've read a lot of books and there's more new stuff I want to read. Like there's always something else to read. But I'm really at the stage where I want to go back now and reread all these favorite books that I've read. So it could be a lot of the Dickens. I might not reread all the Dickens, but like some of the favorites. I'm currently rereading Marcel Proust in a different translation, and I'm just thrilled with it. And there's been, lots of books I reread over the course of my teaching years, and I always found that rewarding. Like a book like Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. I never got sick of teaching that book. I never got tired of rereading it. So it's when we kind of reread, though, that we can make maybe more accurate judgments, because we've changed over the years. We have different life experience, and it's almost like a brand new reading experience, but with this echo of what came before. So I will be in a better position to answer that question if I live long enough to get to the point where I've reread more of the books that I love. I don't always like to rank either. Like there's something that rankles me about ranking. Like others have asked, I'm curious if you'd offer a favorite listing across different English literary periods, Romantics, Regency, Victorian, etc., as well as some favorites across other genres such as Russian literature, science fiction, and American literature. Well, here I can give you some names, some authors that come to mind as favorites. I can try to answer this one a little bit, very loosely. Romantic period, the big five British Romantic poets, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Keats, Shelley, Byron, actually big six, and Blake, big William Blake fan. Those six Romantic poets are top tier. Regency, you got to think of Jane Austen, right? Probably my favorite Jane Austen books that come to mind would be Mansfield Park and Emma. Victorian literature, well, Dickens, I guess, if you count Dickens in that period. Thomas Hardy, a favorite author. Wow. Yeah, he's great. Yes, and then also if you go into like people like Flaubert in France, and I like a lot of French literature, so like that 19th century French literature is big for me, like Balzac, Flaubert, Stendhal. Yeah, all good stuff. What about Russian literature? Well, of course, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment would be in my favorite books list. I've read that twice. And who else? Turgenev. But it's really Dostoevsky and Tolstoy would be like top tier for me in Russian literature. I haven't read enough 20th century Russian literature, so I don't really want to weigh in on that. Science fiction, Ray Bradbury. I liked Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy quite a bit. Philip K. Dick, like what I've read of him has been like uneven, but like the good stuff was really good. I went through a Dan Simmons phase where I read like his Hyperion novels of space opera, and they were pretty cool. But then like Dan Simmons kind of like, I don't know what happened to him. Like I lost interest in him. Ursula K. Le Guin comes to mind. I really liked her Earthsea trilogy for fantasy. Yeah, there's so many good science fiction authors, but I want to read more science fiction. Like that's a real goal. Like for instance, I want to read Dune. American literature, wow, so many highlights. Melville comes to mind. Frederick Douglass I like. Whitman, Walt Whitman's poetry. Yeah, there's so many highlights. In Mark Twain would be up there, influential author. But and then I've read lots of 20th century American authors, but like it's hard for me to narrow that down right off the top of my head. My question is, do you support a Great Books curriculum in public schools, and if so, why? This is a tough one, and there's a complicated answer to it. You would think that I would support a great books curriculum in the public schools, talking K through 12, I guess. And I do think that students ought to be exposed to those great books, and to a large degree they are exposed to some of them, I think, still. And yet I wouldn't want to ram great books down their throats, because the way books sometimes get taught in public schools is probably not conducive to instilling a love of reading. And to me, a great books education is a lifelong project. And if you get turned off at a young age, you'll never get to these books, or you'll get to them so late that it's like you can't catch up. And I wouldn't want to turn off students, but I do think they should be exposed to great books. And this is a little bit contrary, again, to what people might assume about me, is I think kids in K through 12 should be exposed. They should be assigned more contemporary literature, stuff that's age appropriate, stuff that's like diverse, stuff that's there's a lot of good stuff out there that speaks to them more directly. And again, this is the idea, is like to flip that switch, to say, like, turn on to literature, realize what a great book or a good book can do for you, and then you'll eventually get to the other stuff. But so I would say I'm going to take a middle position there, that I think there should be like a great books component to curriculum, but it shouldn't be some kind of dogmatic, rigid, like we're only doing, you're only reading Plato and nothing else. Like, let's get real. Like, let's make literature, let's make great books, or let's make good books, even if they're not called great yet. Let's just make good books a part of their lives, and make sure that they're getting exposed to a nice range from classic to contemporary. And hopefully sparks will start to fly somewhere along the line. Question: besides BookTube and reading, what are your other hobbies? Well, I love music. I collect music. I play some music. I've written a lot of songs, and me and my wife have recorded lots of like home recorded albums. We're not as active as we used to be, but in our heyday, in our 20s and 30s, and even into our 40s, we did a lot of home taping. And it's something I want to get back to now that I have a little more time and I have a lot of good gear. It would be nice if my hearing had kept pace with all that. But yeah, so we love music, and I do collect records. I've got like a big collection of vinyl and CDs, and I love to stream music. And so I'm an avid music listener as well. And then I do like to hike. I don't get out as much as I used to because our dog is old now. He doesn't like to go for long walks. But we always love the outdoors and going for day hikes. I wish I was more of a gardener. I like the idea of having a green thumb, but my thumb is not green at all. Like but it's something I might want to work on. What kind of degree do you have, and where did you go to school? I mentioned this previously. A bachelor's in Bachelor of Arts in English and Latin from Westchester University, which is where I now live, and also the Master's in English with a concentration in creative writing from University of Texas, Austin, and that's my education. How did you learn about the great books? Well, I have a whole video about this. I'll link to it in the show description. That's gotten quite a few views, and it's basically telling that story about the great books of the Western world set that was like this white elephant that ended up in my bedroom, and I used to stare at those volumes all the time. And one day I just started perusing them. And that, plus the fact that there were a lot of other books in my room, and I like those Magnum Easy Eye classics. Like, they were really affordable. Used to go to the local Two Guys store and get them, and the books I was exposed to in school. All these kind of cultivated an interest in classics, and then but the actual great books of the Western world stuff, like that story is told in that video. What area do you live in? Where did you grow up? I grew up outside of Philadelphia in a town called Broomall, Marple Newtown. And now I live in Westchester, which is about half an hour west of there. And like I said, this is where I went to college. And after moving around quite a bit, we ended up back here. And I love it. I love Southeast Pennsylvania. Were my parents big readers? Yeah, they were. But as I thought about this question, I don't think I used to see them reading a lot. Like my dad probably read mostly like at nighttime when they went to bed, and maybe my mom too, or maybe my mom read when I was at school. But they would talk about books sometimes, and I remember my mom went on this like Abraham Lincoln jag for a while, and she wanted us to read this book that she had read I think it's called Herndon's Lincoln. It was probably a biography. I never got around to reading it, but she would sometimes like recommend a book like that. And my dad, he was pretty well read, and a lot of his books ended up in my room. He used to be in the Book of the Month Club. This was sort of before I was born. And we would sometimes talk about books, but mainly when I would see him reading, he was reading the newspaper. Yeah, like books were around us. It was more like the environment of books than actually like seeing my parents like read a lot. But the fact that we had the books meant that they valued it. So then I inherited that influence, I guess. Have you used any of the 10 volumes from the Introduction to the Great Books as a way to jump into the great books? Why or why not? Or have you chosen to tackle the 10-year plan instead? So what the questioner is referring to are these, they came out in both hardcover and paperback, and I have a mix of the two. They're called Introduction to the Great Books, and I think I have a video on this. And they were like guides to reading the great books set. And those introductions to the great books are a wonderful way to jump into the great books set. I used them like when I was starting on my journey, and I recommend them. And in fact, I'm using them to help me prepare for this 10-year plan that I'm doing a series on. If those readings are covered in those intro volumes, I will consult them, because they have sometimes some pretty good discussion questions in there, and they have some good introductions to the authors and the work, summaries and things like, so they're really useful for that. Why did I choose to tackle the 10-year plan instead? Well, because those intro volumes, except with the exception of the first volume actually mirrors the year one of the 10-year plan pretty closely. It's not exact, but it's very close. So with that accepted, the other volumes kind of go by type of book. So there's like a couple volumes on imaginative literature. There's there's a volume on like religion and theology, and then volumes on philosophy and ethics, and volumes on history and science and math and stuff like that. So if you're going through those books, you're making a very different choice. You're saying like, okay, I only want to read literature right now, and then here's a whole nice set of readings to expose me to that. I wanted to be more wide-ranging and diverse, so kind of hit on all these different genres, and that's what the 10-year plan tries to do. The goal of the 10-year plan was to get you to read some of every single author in the set. I like that's to me is like a perfect introduction to the set. That's basically why I chose to tackle that. How have you found your time on BookTube so far? Do you have any BookTube plans for the future? I love BookTube, and I don't think I even realized BookTube was called BookTube until I decided to start making videos for this channel. I remember watching Steve Donahue before I ever really got too deeply involved in any of this, and I enjoyed watching a lot of his videos. He's such a good raconteur, and then I created the channel, I think a couple of years ago or more, just to park it, to reserve the name. I didn't do anything with it. It was just a sort of a long-term goal that I wanted to talk about books. And then last year, a little over a year ago, is when I actually started making real content for the channel. So I've been active on this channel for a little over a year. And what really is special to me is the community that I've found. Like the people who watch these videos and comment, reach out, ask questions. Some of those people have channels that I've subscribed to and follow, and you get kind of bonded to these people and you look forward to seeing them show up in your feed. And that is something I didn't expect, and it's just wonderful. So here's the thing about reading. It's such a solitary experience. It's such a solitary activity. It's just you and the book and the distant author who may no longer be here on this earth. But it's that silent, immersive, meditative, pensive activity. And then, unless all your friends are bookish types, there's hardly anyone you can talk to about the books that you've read. You might belong to a book club, which is good. But then if you're in a book club, you kind of have to force yourself to like read the book that everyone agrees we're going to read next. But here on BookTube, you can virtually talk to people about what you've been reading. And people seem to really take an interest in like your reading updates, your Friday Reads videos, your Poetry Thursday videos, your book hauls. And the more videos I made, the more I was watching other people's similar videos. And I was really interested in that. Like, it's great fun. And, hearing people review books, hearing people compare editions, talk about book collecting, it's all good. It's all good. It's so much fun. And I'm having a blast doing it. And for someone who's very much homebound now, like I work remotely from home, I don't get out much. The dog doesn't want to get further than like around the block on his walks. So my orbit has really shrunk. And but this gets me out of the house virtually, and it's really nice. It's really been a really great boon to my life. Do I have book plans for the future? Yeah, I'm always planning new videos. More fun with the green screen coming up. I want to do more vlogs or vlogs, stuff that's more teaching oriented. I got the 10-year plan going, and I feel like I'm just getting started and I'm still learning how to make videos and how to get better at them. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun to try different kinds of videos out, different locations, different shots, and we'll see where it goes. And I'll close with this last question, which really gave me a laugh. Was that you climbing the light pole on the southeast corner of Broad and Chestnut last Sunday? Well, I don't know. You might have to talk to my lawyer. Go Birds. Thanks everyone for hanging out with me. I hope I answered your questions satisfactorily. Feel free to ask more questions, and maybe I'll do another Q&A when I get to 2,000 subscribers, if that day ever comes. Anyway, it's been a thrill sharing the time with you. Keep reading some great books. Bye-bye.